581-6858 today. Spectrum Business, made to work.
You are loved. You are valued. You are resilient. You got this.
You're there for them. We're here for you. Find free care guides at aarp.org/caregiving.
Good evening, I'm Errol Lewis, and you are watching Spectrum News coverage of the Democratic National Convention. It is 8 o'clock on the East Coast, 5 p.m. on the West Coast, and 7 p.m. in Chicago, where tonight's theme for day one of the convention is For the People. About 50,000 people have descended on the Windy City, including thousands of anti-war activists. Vice President Kamala Harris will formally accept the Democratic nomination for president on Thursday night. But the big focus tonight will be on President Joe Biden, who less than a month ago dropped out of the race and endorsed his vice president for the nomination. Convention speakers this evening will highlight his legacy. Former First Lady and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is expected to address the convention in a little bit over an hour. We're also going to hear from First Lady Jill Biden, as well as President Biden himself. His daughter Ashley Biden will introduce the president before he delivers the keynote address. Let's head to the United Center right now and check in with Spectrum News anchor and chief national political reporter Josh Robin, as well as national political reporter Taylor Popolars. And Taylor, set the stage for us tonight. What's the mood like, and what are they expected to do?
Well, Errol, as you mentioned, the theme for tonight is For the People, and we had a conversation yesterday with the chair of the Democratic Party, Jamie Harrison, who told us tonight will be all about honoring President Joe Biden's legacy and celebrating the fact that he was willing to pass the torch to his vice president, Kamala Harris, and really help improve Democrats' chances come November. So we expect a lot of the speakers to talk about what Biden has done as president for the last 3.5 years. Even in the last hour or two, we've heard some of the earlier speakers in the day talk about Biden's response to the pandemic, talk about the fact that Biden has passed the infrastructure law. So kind of ticking through all of those things. In terms of the bigger name speakers we expect to hear tonight, obviously you mentioned Hillary Clinton. President Biden himself will get to kind of give his political farewell, even though he's going to remain in office for the rest of the year. But we also expect to hear from a wide array of members of the party who sort of represent the future. New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, who was one of the finalists to be Kamala Harris's running mate. We also expect to hear from some really close Biden allies like Delaware Senator Chris Coons. So I think it'll be a really interesting passing of the torch. Most notably, though, Biden and First Lady Jill Biden will both speak tonight, but then they're both going to California afterward tonight to go on vacation the rest of the week, so they won't even be here for the rest of the week. Kind of a turning of the page on his presidency as Harris is embraced as the new leader of the party.
Okay, a lot of history being made here tonight. Thank you for that, Taylor. And Josh, tell us about the procedural things that are happening. I saw that they voted and had some discussion about the Democratic platform, which I take it has not been updated since last month when President Biden was still at the top of the ticket.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Actually, I looked through it, and there are, check my notes here, 287 mentions of Joe Biden in that platform, with only 82 mentions of Kamala Harris. So you could see that they didn't have the chance to change that platform. The platform, of course, is non-binding, but it nonetheless is what the party stands for, at least in principle. Of course, when it comes to governing, that's a different matter. The platform itself, Errol, is quite different in a number of ways from the Republican platform. Probably most notably is how thick the Democratic platform is compared to how thin the Republican one is. The Republican platform is 28 pages. pages. I should note a couple of those pages just have full-size pictures of the former president, the nominee Donald Trump. The Democratic platform is 92 pages. Now, the platform just got released a little while ago. I apologize, I didn't have a chance to read the whole thing, but I did read a number of sections, including the section on Israel, which is, of course, in the news now, not the least of which because there are a number of protesters here in Chicago. The mentions of Israel, 29, including a number of mentions about the importance of a Palestinian state, of American policy should be forwarding that, and the dignity of people in that area, whether you're Palestinian or Israeli. The Republican platform had one mention of Israel, which just affirmed Israel's security and hope for peace within the Middle East, Errol.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Josh. We're going to check back with you and Taylor a little bit later in the half hour. But let's talk about some of those protests. Protesters have been rallying outside the United Center, mostly protesting against the war between Israel and Hamas, despite the change at the top of the ticket. And we know at least 6 protesters were arrested. Let's head outside now. Our Cassie Semyon is covering the protests. What is the latest, Cassie?
Yeah, Errol, as you mentioned, 6 people arrested for that breach of the security fence. We want to make clear, though, there was never any threat to any of the attendees or any of the political VIPs here at the convention center. That breach was actually a little ways away from here. It was the outer perimeter fence that was breached, not the interior. The way they set up the security here was to make sure that all precautions were taken to make sure everyone is safe here. And when we heard from the police earlier today, there was a big stress on the fact that the police are here not just to protect those attending the convention. They wanted to relay to those protesting, no matter what they were protesting, whether it was the war in Israel, whether it was climate change or any number of issues that protesters have gathered here in the Windy City for. They are here to also make sure that protesters are able to safely voice their First Amendment rights, keep things calm, keep the peace here, make sure everyone is able to safely enjoy the festivities, whether that is the DNC or the protests on the outside. So as you mentioned, and I mentioned before, Errol, 6 people arrested, a relatively small number considering what police were really preparing for over the last several months. Real concerns that this could be like 1968 when the convention was held here in Chicago during the Vietnam War, and we saw those protests against that war. They were worried something similar could happen here at this convention. So right now, police are quite happy with how things have unfolded. They're urging people to remain calm, to continue with these peaceful protests, and that everyone can have a successful week here in Chicago.
All right. Thanks very much for that, Cassie. Of course, the Secret Service very much involved in particular because the President of the United States is there tonight. And Josh, let me bring you back in for some historical perspective. The Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968 featured protests against the Vietnam War and violence between protesters and the police. That was really all-out chaos. It sounds like this time around you've got the National Guard, you've got the Chicago Police Department, you've got the Secret Service. It seems like they're all on high alert.
So far, this bearing any real comparison to 1968, which had been described as a police riot afterwards. There's just, obviously things can change, but I think Chicago and policing in general has changed a lot since then. And just of note, a number of things are different. First of all, obviously there are some significant differences that people have with the president's policy in the Middle East. But at the time of the convention in 1968, 17,000 American GIs were dying a year in Vietnam. That obviously really focused people on the war. Additionally, Errol, is that nominees at that time were chose differently. The convention here is we know that Kamala Harris is going to be the nominee. We didn't know that Hubert Humphrey was necessarily going to be the nominee after the 1968 convention. There are some parallels, of course. The incumbent president had decided not to run. It was LBJ in 1968. It's Joe Biden now. There was an assassination attempt this year against the former president. In 1968, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. were actually assassinated. And one just final note, Errol, which I hadn't even realized until doing some research on 1968, is that there actually was a convention in Chicago between 1968 and now. It was in 1996. So the comparisons still happen, but Chicago has been here before. It perhaps wasn't as controversial of a time, but in 1996, Bill Clinton was renominated, and that went off without a hitch. I suspect that here, Errol, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some hecklers here during a speech or two, maybe even during Kamala Harris. But so far, we've seen just a handful of arrests. Obviously, that could change. But I think that the police here are a lot more prepared, and the mayor's prepared. It was really a cult of personality of the then Mayor Daley in Chicago back in '68.
Okay, thank you very much for that perspective, Josh. Let's head to the convention floor right now. There are some labor leaders who are speaking, but I want to check in with our roving reporter, Kevin Fry. Which delegations are you at right now? Who are you talking with down there, Kevin?
Right, so we're hanging out with the Michigan delegation at the moment, and of course, it is worth noting that there are some uncommitted delegates within that delegation. Now, we have one of the committed delegates. This is the Michigan Speaker Pro Tem of the House, Lori Pahutsky. Let me make sure I have all that correct. What is your feeling heading in tonight? This is your first time at one of these conventions because 2020, of course, was very unique.
I mean, the excitement is incredible. It's wonderful to be here and to be able to be a part of history and hopefully working to elect a federal administration that is going to work with Michigan and support the incredible work that Democrats are doing in Michigan.
Michigan is part of the blue wall. Can Harris hold on to the blue wall?
I think it's undoubtable. I mean, you know, I was at the rally a couple of weeks ago. The turnout was incredible, the excitement was incredible, and the momentum that the Harris campaign has been building is just something that we've never seen before.
Now, I do have to ask about the uncommitted delegates. Obviously, there are a few from Michigan. This comes as there's the continued questions about what's going to happen in the war between Israel and Gaza and Hamas. Do you have any concerns that that could diminish Harris's chances? How are you evaluating how she's handling that issue?
I mean, I know that there have been conversations between the Harris campaign and folks who are in the uncommitted camp. I trust the campaign and the vice president to be doing the work that needs to happen. The fact of the matter is we're the big tent party, and, you know, we have folks who are still trying to figure out how they're going to proceed forward. We're looking to make sure that they feel confident to cast their vote for Vice President Harris.
One last thing. Tonight is about honoring Joe Biden. What has he meant for Michigan?
Being able to partner with President Biden has been just truly an honor. We have done some incredible work the last few years since the Democrats have had the majority in Michigan, and having a federal partner in President Biden has made that work so much easier, and it's just been an honor to work with him.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Lori. So just one voice of the many delegates here on the House floor, and you might hear some booing. That's probably because they're mentioning Donald Trump. I'm just going out on a limb there and guessing. But just a little bit of the feel here on the floor.
Okay, Kevin. We'll let you go over to another delegation, and we'll check in with you in a little bit. Let me bring in our panel of Spectrum News political experts. Jason Fechner is in Milwaukee. Susan Arbetter is in Albany, New York. Tim Boyum is in Raleigh, North Carolina. And Alex Cohen is in El Segundo, California. And Alex, let's talk about the president's legacy and what he's done over the last 3.5 years. This is really kind of a swan song for Joe Biden. And as we heard, he's going to be heading out to Santa Barbara after this convention. What's that say to you about, I guess, the early read of what Joe Biden has meant to this party?
You know, it's an interesting moment. Joe Biden has spoken at every single convention since the 1970s. I mean, that's really a remarkable track. Now, I did hear one of his confidants say today that this is, in fact, not a swan song. Let's not forget, he's still a president for many months to go and has much to do. But it's an interesting moment for him to reflect back on all that he has done throughout a career and certainly throughout this administration, but also a moment for him to really officially pass the baton to his vice president, Kamala Harris, and showing this as a moment of unity. This party, compared to the Republican National Convention, where it really seemed to be a party of one person, this is his opportunity to show that this is a party of many people. And that Santa Barbara trip, which you mentioned, we should note we learned today as he was traveling to Chicago that he'll be spending time with his family. His son, Hunter, Hunter Biden, of course, lives here in Southern California as well. I would not at all be surprised if they're going to spend some time. This is a beautiful time of year to be in Santa Barbara. It's my favorite time to be there. I can definitely imagine him showing up at a beach and the two of them really connecting about what a tremendous experience this has been for him.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Alex. And Jason, right now, union leaders are addressing the convention. They're going up one after another. Each is getting a big round of applause. And we're expecting to hear from UAW President Shawn Fain tonight as well. Unions, of course, have been a big part of the president's legacy and the coalition that elected him. If Vice President Kamala Harris is elected, is she going to be as pro-union? Is there daylight between them, or does she have as strong of a track record?
Well, there could be some daylight between them. She's got a pretty pro-union background, of course. We'll have to wait and see how this all shakes out in the less than 3 months now to the election day. The theme of tonight, of course, we the people, and all eyes and ears, as Alex just mentioned there, on what President Joe Biden will have to say. But there's this sub-theme to all of this tonight, and it's on that focus on unions and Democrats laying out why they say the Democratic Party is the place for union support. A couple important numbers. You got 2.7 million union members right now in battleground states. And President Joe Biden had 56% union support back in 2020. So with the margin being as close as it is, with these margins of error playing into these battleground states right now, Harris really needs to get close to that 56% number again, possibly exceed it as well. And that's what they're working on. Tim Walz, of course, a former union member. And as I mentioned, Harris has been supportive of certain union policies in the past. Fascinating to see how this all plays out in the next couple of days there on the union floor. As you mentioned, Shawn Fain set to speak there. Sean O'Brien with the Teamsters, though, not set to speak there at the DNC. He spoke here at the RNC in Milwaukee just a few weeks ago. A lot of Teamsters rank and file not happy with his support out there of Republicans. No endorsement from the Teamsters of Trump or Harris yet, but that's kind of a subplot to all of this as well. So a lot of fascinating elements when it comes to union support of the Democrats and of Harris and Walz going forward. Yeah.
In fact, let's remind our viewers. I mean, the head of the Teamsters spoke at the Republican National Convention, and that was for the first time in more than a century that the head of that particular very large union addressed the RNC. I heard he wanted to be here as well. This would have been a great night for him to be there, but we're not going to see him tonight, are we?
No, we're not going to see him there. I am told that a Teamsters member is one of those labor union leaders who is appearing on stage at some point here in night one. So the Teamsters still playing a role, of course. Sean O'Brien will not be there on stage, even though he had initially said back during the RNC that he wanted to get on stage with both Republicans and Democrats. It doesn't appear that Democrats are extending him the invitation at this point.
Okay, thanks for that. And Tim, during the Republican convention, we saw how united that party was behind former President Donald Trump. Democrats were anything but united at that time. I think things are, of course, different. President Biden was still in the race back then, barely hanging on by a thread. It seems like a difference of a month has really changed everything, hasn't it?
I mean, who could have ever imagined this much so? And I think it started, frankly, in a lot of ways in North Carolina. The delegation here was the first to rally around Kamala Harris that night and voted unanimously to support her. And I think that's what's really changed the course so quickly in this race. We've seen it play out in polling where Harris is leading. The New York Times, the Siena poll, where she's leading by a couple points in several of the battleground states, including North Carolina now. I do sort of hesitate to take too much stock into this feeling right now, because it is a feeling, and it's almost like this honeymoon is, it's an extended honeymoon that Kamala Harris is getting because of the torch being passed earlier before the convention. Most of these polls are still within the margin of error. Things are going to really start shifting, I think, after Labor Day. I talked to the RNC chairman today, Michael Whatley, for a podcast later this week, and he was trying to, not put a lot of attention on that she's doing better than some people thought. But finally, when I pressed him on, he said, yes, she's got a sugar high. And another Democratic pollster I talked to said that the pollsters seem to be intoxicated with its Democratic enthusiasm, but the question is whether they'll have a hangover after Labor Day. And so I think that's something we're going to watch right now. One thing I've said is these are like pep rallies, and everybody has a great pep rally, but not everybody can win the game. And so I think it's going to be what happens after Labor Day that's really going to matter, the end result in November.
Okay. Susan, the former First Lady, former Senator of New York, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, is going to be addressing the convention tonight. She was the first woman to break the glass ceiling by winning a major party nomination. I imagine this week's got to be bittersweet for her as well, knowing that, another woman will get the chance, but it's not going to be her.
Yeah, Errol, 8 years after a very bitter loss against Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton has a chance once again to talk about breaking that ultimate glass ceiling. She and her husband, Bill Clinton, have made it known that they are firmly behind the Harris-Walz ticket. They came out very early and very strongly for them. Harris is the second woman to win a major party nomination, of course, after Clinton, as you mentioned. Now, from what I'm hearing, Clinton will not be looking backwards. She's going to be looking ahead, touching on the poll numbers that this new Democratic ticket has in recent weeks seen. And of course, she's going to be discussing why breaking this particular glass ceiling is so critical to the country right now. She's also bound to mention abortion rights and that 1 in 3 women of reproductive age live in a state right now with an abortion ban. Clinton is the only woman to have run one-on-one against Donald Trump, so she may have some advice for Harris, who is not as well known as Clinton won when she threw her hat into the ring in 2016. In many respects, Clinton, along with people like Madeleine Albright, for example, created the environment in which a woman can be seen as a leader on the world stage, which is exactly what Kamala Harris needs to project during this week.
Okay, thank you for that, Susan. And actually, let me go back to Tim for a minute. Tim, I noticed that the candidates have been spending a lot of time in battleground states. That's the strategic move. A lot of them have been, in particular, spending time in North Carolina, in your state. Is Harris trying to expand the map? Is she trying to win a state that generally has not gone Democratic over the last several cycles?
Yeah, just to remind people, Barack Obama won here in 2008. Before that, it was 1976 when a Democrat had won. So historically, it's not been a state for Democrats in North Carolina. But with our population changes, a very fast-growing state, things are inching towards that way. And Democrats have constantly been trying to win in this state at all levels. Obviously, we have a Democratic governor, but that seems to be kind of a separate thing. It's been a little bit with Charlie Brown and the football here. They haven't been able to quite get across the finish line with that. But they do believe now. Our governor has said that it feels like 2008 all over again. And so, yeah, they're expanding their map. Kamala Harris was here last Friday. Her campaign has been pushing with us to do interviews with campaign folks over and over. It's just been getting a lot of attention over the last several days. I will caution, while they say Harris is up 2 in North Carolina, that New York Times poll, it's within the margin of error. And this race was always going to be within the margin of error in North Carolina. Donald Trump won by some 74,000 votes. The question is, as I mentioned before, whether this enthusiasm can lead to votes in November, extra votes. And they need to bring in black women, which are a huge part of the North Carolina vote here. They need to bring in women generally. And they believe having Kamala Harris on the ticket and the issue, as Susan was talking about with abortion, that'll drive voter turnout. But obviously, you know, we're just going to have to wait and see. But they do believe that it's in play now.
Okay. And Jason, sort of same question, right? You've seen a lot of these candidates, the Republicans and Democrats. In fact, I understand that Kamala Harris is going to be campaigning there tomorrow.
That's right, Errol. J.D. Vance was just here Friday. He's coming back tomorrow as well, campaigning down in Kenosha with a press event down there. And Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, they are set to hold a rally at Pfizer Forum just across the street from us here, where the Republican National Convention took place just a few weeks ago. I don't know about the location on that, if they're trying to send a message to the Trump campaign, kind of moving in on their turf a little bit, if you will, but kind of unprecedented that during their national political convention just down the road, that they would come up here, hold a rally. Doors are set to open at 4 o'clock, and then they're inviting everyone to stay there after their speeches at some point tomorrow, late afternoon, early evening, to then watch former President Barack Obama address the crowd back in Chicago, simulcasting it at the same time. And for those from outside the Midwest, put the Bears, Packers, and Brewers, Cubs rivalries aside, Milwaukee's just about an hour to an hour and a half north of downtown Chicago, so a relatively quick commute on tap for Harris and Walz on Tuesday.
Yeah, Bears versus Packers, a very serious rivalry. Thanks for that,
Amen
Tim.
to that, sir.
Let's go back to the floor where Kevin Fry is with a different delegation. Who are you talking with now, Kevin?
Hello.
You're
Can
on
you
the
hear
air,
me?
sir. Yes, I got you.
Hey, Errol, seems we're having a little technical difficulty, but I wanted to introduce you, if you want to come this way, just a step. Well, I'll let you introduce yourself and explain to me how you know Kamala Harris.
Sure. My name is Latifah Simon. I'm a very excited congressional candidate from California's 12th district, and I've known Kamala for over 23 years. I worked in her office when she was the district attorney in San Francisco, and I led all of her reentry programs. So I am so excited to be here this week. We are about to elect Kamala Harris to be the president of the United States. Yes.
What was she like as a boss?
She was tough, the toughest boss that I've ever had, but the greatest leader that I've ever worked for. And I am so excited that the United States is going to be able to see the Kamala that so many of us knew. She leaves late and she comes early, and she learns, and she is just a stellar leader who cares so much about the people that she's working with.
How much does she have an impact on your decision to run for Congress?
Are you kidding? Again, as a black woman, as a single mother, she was raised by a single mother, and when I worked for her, she talked to me about the quintessential American story. It's about women and communities coming up together and fighting hard and serving the people. So when I lost everything, literally, I called Kamala Harris. When I lost my husband, I called her and I said, what do I do next? And she says, serve your people. And so that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to win my race as Kamala's going to win her race. And I can't wait to serve in Congress when the President of the United States is a woman, again, from Oakland, California. Very excited.
One last thing. Tonight is also about honoring Joe Biden.
Yes, it is.
What do you make of his legacy, and what do you want to hear from him tonight?
Tonight was a night where we actually celebrated labor unions. Joe Biden has been the best president as it relates to working class people in this country, and we are so honored to be able to not only send him off, but bring him in. He has a living legacy, and he'll continue to mentor all of us, those of us who want to fight for working class people, and are so proud of him. And I am so proud of Kamala Harris.
Well, I wish you luck in your race. Thank you for chatting with us. So, Errol, I think it's easy to say that in the California delegation, which is where we are, by the way, down here front and center, I wonder why, considering who's the presidential nominee. You can tell the enthusiasm that there is here for their hometown hero, essentially.
All right, thanks very much for that, Kevin. Let's head back over to Taylor Popolars. And Taylor, you covered the Trump campaign for Spectrum News. Talk about the counter-programming that the party is intending to do, that Donald Trump's going to be doing while the Democrats hold their convention.
Yeah, there is a lot of it, Errol. A stark contrast from the Republican convention when then Democratic nominee Joe Biden was at home in isolation with coronavirus, and Kamala Harris wasn't really much on the campaign trail. The Trump team has a presence here in Chicago to try to counter-program with the convention. They're holding press events each day at the Trump Tower that is right along the Riverwalk. We know that a couple senators were there today, Rick Scott from Florida and Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. But Trump and Vance himself are crisscrossing to all 7 of the battleground states that you were talking about with Tim and Jason. Pennsylvania today, Michigan and Wisconsin tomorrow, North Carolina on Wednesday, Arizona and Georgia on Thursday, and more events in Arizona as well as Nevada on Friday. So they're really trying to get up as much attention as they can away from this convention and really get out and show voters that they're campaigning hard as they try to figure out how to run against Harris and 4 weeks into her being the nominee.
And